Oh. What are you doing here in the middle of my wafflegasm? It's not a very nice interruption. Have you no manners? Well, I guess if you're going to be here, you might as well know my name first. I'm Ben Starr, the ultimate food geek, and I am currently eating the best waffle on planet Earth. And if you stick around, I'm going to teach you how to make it. Now, folks, I understand that everybody's got their own preferences when it comes to everything. There's a million kinds of waffles out there, and yeah, everybody loves waffles, but let's face it, most of them are bad. They're only a vehicle for getting soft butter and maple syrup into your mouth hole as quickly as possible. But what if there was a waffle that was so delicately crisp on the outside and ethereally light and fluffy on the inside that you almost just wanted to eat it by itself with no butter or maple syrup? How cool would that be? Well, turns out you were watching the channel of an ultimate food geek, and guess what I've figured out over the last 15 years? It's just unbelievable, folks. Are you ready to find out how to do it? All right, here we go. Couple of orders of business. Today I am speaking in ounces. This is because the majority of my audience is American and we are taught ounces before we're taught metric. But for you metric folks, the conversions are right there on the screen, or you can expand the video description, which is located directly beneath this video above the comments. Click where it says more. The recipe is all written out there, as well as a direct link to my website, ultimatefoodgeek.com, where you can print out the recipe for free. Next, today we are weighing our ingredients. Yes, folks, I hate to be the bearer of unfortunate news, but you cannot bake precisely without a scale. And a waffle, after all, is a thing of great precision. Just a little bit off in either direction on one of these ingredients, and you will not achieve that utterly perfect texture. So if you don't have a scale, shame on you, go get one. If you want to get the best one, this is mine. It's restaurant grade, takes AAA batteries or plugs into the wall, and there's a link to it in the video description below. But of course, any cheap old scale will do. Our first ingredient is sourdough starter. Now, if you don't have a sourdough starter, don't worry, folks. I'm going to get to you in just a second. Your starter needs to be at 100% hydration. This means that when you feed it, you are feeding it exactly equal weights of flour and water. If you feed by ratios, that's a 1-to-1-to-1 or a 1-to-2-to-2. If you feed in bulk like I do, because I only feed my starter when I get low and need to make more, I'm feeding it 16 ounces of flour and 16 ounces of water. Doesn't matter as long as the weights of flour and water that you feed your starter are exactly equal. If you feed in any other way and your sourdough starter is not at 100% hydration, I can't tell you how this recipe is going to turn out for you, because I have formulated it for a universal basic standard of 100% hydration starter. If you don't have a sourdough starter, don't worry. You can still make this recipe. It's not going to taste quite as complex and delicious, but it will still have that incredible texture. So get the bowl that you're going to make this recipe in, and the night before you make the recipe, measure out 4 ounces of flour, 4 ounces of water, stir it together really good, cover it with a pot lid or a plate or some plastic wrap, and let it sit on your counter overnight until the next morning. Now, if you've lollygagged around and you're trying to get these waffles out here in the next hour, you can still mix 4 ounces of flour and 4 ounces of water together, but because you're not going to achieve that perfect hydration, your texture is not going to be quite as good. You really want that mixture of flour and water to have sat around for a while. So into our bowl, I am going to measure out 8 ounces of this starter. Now, it doesn't matter when the last time your starter was fed. You can use discard if you're one of those people that feeds your starter on a regular basis, which you shouldn't. You only need to feed your starter when you get low and need to make more. You keep your starter in the refrigerator and your life will be a whole lot easier. Watch my sourdough videos to find out more. To our starter, we are adding 4 ounces of buttermilk, and that means real buttermilk. If you're one of those weirdos that stirs a little bit of vinegar or lemon juice into milk and you're like, oh, I just made buttermilk. No, you didn't just make buttermilk. You just made vinegary milk. Real buttermilk is a critical ingredient in virtually all proper baking recipes. There is never a need to not have it in your refrigerator. It lasts weeks or months beyond the expiration date because it is already spoiled with the selected strain of bacteria that lives in it. And you only have to buy buttermilk like one time, because when you finally get low on buttermilk, you just refill the container with fresh milk, leave it on your countertop for a couple of days, and it turns itself into more buttermilk. Pretty cool, huh? If you are not a buttermilk fan, you need to watch my video right up here, Buttermilk 101, because it will blow your mind about how important this ingredient is and how easy it is to keep around all the time. All right, we are adding 4 ounces of buttermilk. Now, if you happen to be watching this video from a country where buttermilk is not popular, you can substitute kefir, which is actually the exact same thing as buttermilk. If you can't find kefir, dilute sour cream or yogurt half and half with milk. That will get you approximately where you need to go. Next up, we have 3 ounces of oil. Now, I'm using a neutral oil, avocado oil, which is my primary neutral oil in my kitchen. But you can get creative here. You can use a full flavored oil like walnut oil or sesame oil or even extra virgin olive oil if you want to. This is going to give a pronounced flavor to your waffles. So depending on the application that you're using them in, you might benefit from getting creative with your oils. Now, a lot of people ask me if they can use melted butter for flavor. Well, yes and no. The problem with butter as a cooking fat is that it is only about 80% fat. The rest of it is water, salt, milk solids, and such as that. So if you add 3 ounces of melted butter, you're actually only adding 2.4 ounces of fat, and the rest is water and other stuff. So it's gonna screw up the hydration rate of this recipe. I have used clarified butter in this recipe before, but you have to make sure you cook off all of the water before you measure your 3 ounces into the bowl. Brown butter produced an exceptionally delicious waffle. But 9 times out of 10 when I make this recipe, I just use a neutral oil that does not contribute its own character to the recipe. All right, 3 ounces of oil. Next, we're going to add 1 egg straight from the backyard. Oh, you don't have chickens in your backyard? Shame on you. Next, we're gonna add 1 ounce of sugar. That's 2 tablespoons, and honestly, I don't measure this. I just sprinkle in the equivalent of about 2 tablespoons. The sugar is in here predominantly as a browning agent and not necessarily as a sweetening agent. So these waffles themselves do not come out perceptibly sweet. If you're trying to lower your sugar intake, just leave the sugar out. Your waffles won't brown quite as nicely, but they'll still turn out okay. And our final liquid ingredient is about 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract, the best you can afford. This is where the majority of our flavor comes into the waffle. And again, if you're doing something creative, you can use other extracts to flavor these waffles beyond or in addition to vanilla. Almond, maple, anise, lemon, pretty much the sky's the limit. And again, I actually don't measure this ingredient, I just pour it in, about 1 tablespoon. All right, now it is time to mix our liquid ingredients together. And if you don't have a Danish Brotpisker, which is Danish for bread whisk, this is the ideal tool for mixing up batters. It's not quite as complex as a whisk, which means that the batter does not get overworked as we stir it. So you can incorporate the dry ingredients into the liquid ingredients in a more delicate way. When you overwork a batter, you're beginning to develop the gluten network, which is something that we absolutely want if we're baking bread. The gluten network is needed in order to trap the carbon dioxide that causes bread to rise. But for quick breads like muffins or pancakes or waffles, we do not want to overwork that gluten, otherwise they will have a bready texture, and that's exactly not what we want. Brotpiskers are cheap. I'll link to my favorite one in the video description below, but if you don't have one, you can just use a whisk. Just be a little bit more careful as you're stirring everything together. All right, now we are gonna get in there and get this mixture fully homogenized. If your starter has been fed recently, or if you just mixed your flour and water together the night before, or worse, this morning, it's gonna take a while to get this homogeneous. Just be patient, work it gently, and it'll eventually come together. Once you have that worked into a nice smooth paste, it's time for the dry ingredients. And the first is 1.8 ounces of any cooking starch. For most of you in the US, that's gonna be cornstarch. It's what's most readily available and cheapest at your supermarket. I, however, have access to several major Asian markets within 10 minutes of my house. So my starch of choice in my kitchen is tapioca starch. It's a little bit more flexible. It has other benefits in other recipes that make it a superior cooking starch for me. But Any conventional kitchen starch will work for this recipe, including arrowroot or potato starch, as long as it is in powder form. Most of the tapioca sold in regular grocery stores in the United States is served either in granular form or in spherical form. Those will not work. Have to have a powder. All right, we are using 1.8 ounces of starch. Using starch in this recipe rather than all flour has several advantages. Primary one being that we are lowering the amount of gluten in the overall recipe. Gluten gives us a bready waffle, which is honestly what you get most of the time, especially when you're dining out at restaurants. We are aiming for that perfect ethereal texture, crispy on the outside, light and fluffy on the inside, almost so that it dissolves on your tongue. And we'll never get that if we use 100% wheat flour. Our final ingredients are salt. If you use a coarse salt like I do, a kosher salt, you're going to want to add about a teaspoon of coarse salt. If you use fine salt, sea salt, table salt, something like that, half of a teaspoon is sufficient. Again, I am so accustomed to baking that I just eyeball this amount. And then half of a teaspoon of baking powder and 1/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda. Now it's time to stir again to incorporate the dry ingredients into the wet. Cooking starch has a finer particle size, so it's a little bit more tricky to get incorporated into your batter. And unlike with pancakes where you are aiming for a slightly lumpy final dough, you want the final dough for your waffles to be fairly smooth. So continue stirring gently until most of the lumps are gone. All right, that's looking pretty good. You may see a few lumps in there, and that's perfectly fine because the next step is going to take care of most of that. Now we want to cover our batter and let it sit or hydrate for at least 30 minutes. This is an important step because it affects the final texture of your waffle, so don't skip it. This is the time for you to preheat your waffle iron, to get your oven onto the warm setting so that as waffles are coming out of the iron, they can remain warm in the oven so that they can all be served at the same time. This also gets you a chance to get the rest of your breakfast ingredients together. Now, it's perfectly fine to mix up this batter an hour or two before you plan to serve it, but not necessarily the night before. While the batter is hydrating, let's have a little bit of a discussion about waffle makers. Because it doesn't matter that this is the recipe for the best waffles on planet Earth. If you've got a crappy waffle maker, you're gonna get a crappy waffle from it. You will not get a perfect waffle from a $40 or $60 waffle maker from Walmart. It just ain't gonna happen, folks. A proper waffle iron is a Belgian waffle iron, first of all, because that gives us nice, deep pockets to hold butter and syrup. Those thin American-style waffles that you get at Waffle House, they're fine, but they are nowhere as exquisite as a proper Belgian waffle. When you lift the waffle iron, if it is not heavy and give you just a little bit of a hernia, something's wrong there because you need thermal mass in order to hold the heat and distribute it evenly throughout the waffle so that we get even browning from the center of the waffle all the way to the edge. And that is accomplished not only through proper waffle maker design, but also through significant thermal mass, meaning heavy. And you'll just never get that from the cheaper waffle irons. Now, of course, you are going to ask me which waffle maker I have, and I'm quite happy to say that I have the Clad Belgian waffle maker, and I have had it for a decade. It wasn't cheap. I paid $300 for it when I bought it 10 years ago. Of course, it was going to be used at my restaurant, so we needed literally the best. And at that time, this was the best. They still sell this waffle maker, although it's been upgraded to be a little bit smarter in terms of tech. And while I've used several of the other popular high-end waffle makers on the list, this one is still my favorite. Look how absolutely gorgeous it is. It weighs in at around 10 pounds. The interior plates are removable to go into the dishwasher, which is a hugely important thing for a waffle maker. Cleaning these is a nightmare unless you can take them out. You may find on some other very trustworthy websites like Serious Eats, I trust everything that those folks say. There are a couple of newer waffle makers on the market that they rank very highly. But for me, it is all about the thermal mass producing the crispiest and fluffiest waffle possible. And there is no other waffle maker on the market today that does it better than the Clad. These are currently running in the $230 range. I will put the link to their current model of this waffle maker in the video description below. And just so you know, if you buy something from one of my links, you actually really help to support this channel so I can continue making super awesome content for you folks. But this video is not sponsored. I was not paid to say any of this. I bought this waffle iron with my own money 10 years ago, and it still works great. It is important to fully preheat your waffle maker before the first batch of waffles goes in. And folks, it's just a rule of the universe that the first batch of waffles is never as good as the second or the third. That's just how it's going to shake out. It's also important to note that you do not need to add any fat to the waffle maker itself, even if the manufacturer tells you to. My recipe is formulated with enough fat for the waffle to release itself from the waffle maker. So unless you're using an old-fashioned cast iron waffle iron, no additional fat on the maker. Same thing holds true for pancakes. When you add a layer of fat onto the cooking surface, you are separating the waffle batter or the pancake batter from the cooking surface, and you end up with a splotchy and uneven browning pattern across the surface of what you're cooking. You actually want your batter to stick to the cooking surface just a little bit, so that you get a nice, even, perfect browning crust across the entire surface, but not stick so much that you can't release it from the cooking surface when it's done. My recipe has that formulated perfectly. So don't you be spraying any cooking spray or brushing any butter on this waffle iron, or your waffles are not going to come out perfect. For my waffle maker, I choose a heat setting 1 notch down from the maximum temperature. I want the outside of my waffle to cook as quickly as possible to get super crisp, while still retaining the moisture on the inside of the waffle. A surface cooking temperature of between 375 Fahrenheit and 400 Fahrenheit is ideal. But the more thermal mass your waffle iron has, you can err on the lower side of that spectrum. 375 degrees Fahrenheit produces an exquisite waffle as long as your waffle maker has the capability to hold that temperature from the moment you put your batter in, rather than cooling down quickly. And this is another thing that separates the high-end models from the cheapies. A great way to know if your waffle iron is going to cook evenly is to take its temperature across various parts of the cooking grid using a non-contact infrared thermometer. If I look here, I see the top of this little cooking tower towards the edge is 394 degrees, and in the center is 402 degrees. Not much of a difference. Top side of the cooking grid, on the outside, I've got 403, and in the center, I have got 404. So we've got a fairly even heat distribution across the full cooking grid, which is thanks to that heavy thermal mass. For the all-clad waffle maker, I have discovered that about 1/3 of a cup of batter is perfect for each cooking well. That distributes the batter from edge to edge, doesn't give you many holes in the final waffle, and is just about perfect. If you're using a different model, you're going to need to do some experimenting to find out which is best for you. You don't want to underfill it, otherwise you'll end up with a waffle that's got a whole bunch of holes or isn't complete around the outside perimeter. But you don't want to overfill each well, because then a lot of the batter is going to run out, and then you've wasted batter, which means less waffles for your mouth hole, and that's a tragedy. As you add the batter, you want to distribute it as good as possible across the cooking surface. If you see missing spots, you can add a little bit more batter. Then you want to close the maker. If it's got a lock, you can lock it, and now you wait. Now, you should see a bunch of steam coming out of your waffle maker, and this all-clad waffle maker is the steamiest maker around. We want to evacuate all of the liquid from the surface of the waffle so that it gets nice and crisp. So if you're not seeing a whole bunch of steam coming out of your waffle maker, you may not have it hot enough, or you may not have a good waffle maker. When the steam starts to subside just a bit, it's time to go ahead and check your waffle. You should meet with a little bit of resistance when you open the door for the first time, because we do want a little bit of the sticking of our batter to the cooking surface. And those are just about perfect, and they lifted free for us just perfectly. If they don't, get in there with a fork around the edge and pry them up, and they'll eventually come up for you. Make sure that you have got a cooling rack ready to transfer your cooked waffles onto. This allows the steam to vent on the bottom and the underside. If you put them directly onto a plate, the steam is going to steam the underside of the waffle and make the underside soggy, which is the last thing you want. Now these can go into a warm oven to hold while you finish baking all of your waffles. And you want to have all of your guests at the table ready to go as you are cooking the waffles. A few minutes of warm oven time actually improves the texture of these waffles. But 20 minutes of time in the oven? They're going to be dead. Now, just look at these folks. These are impossibly perfect. You can tell just by looking at them how crispy, shattery, flaky they are on the outside, but how tender and moist and airy they are on the inside. This is what the most perfect waffle on planet Earth looks like. Now, you already interrupted me at the beginning of this video while I was tasting it, so you sort of know what to expect in terms of taste. But I promise you, if you make this recipe at home with the right waffle maker, you are going to have a wafflegasm that you never expected to have in your entire life. These are so much better than any waffle you have ever tasted anywhere, guaranteed. If you have found this video educational, helpful, or even mildly entertaining, I really hope that I have earned your subscription today. You have no idea how much clicking that like button and clicking that subscribe button helps me out. It helps me take time away from my regular kitchen job to produce content for you. Check out the rest of my channel and my website, ultimatefoodgeek.com, for tons more amazing recipes that will improve your life in the kitchen and beyond. I'm Ben Starr, the Ultimate Food Geek. Thanks for watching.